Hey guys, what is up? So today we're diving into Shannon Doherty's podcast called Let's Be Clear with Shannon Doherty. And oh my goodness, the tea that gets spilled, and it's actually a two-parter. So the first part is Let's Be Charmed with Holly Mary Combs, part 1, and also the second part is Let's Be Charmed with Holly Mary Combs, part 2. So they talk about, honestly, the whole drama, the tea that went down on Charmed, one of the most famous TV shows, successful ones of all time. And although there is a lot of tea, I'm going to summarize what the two ladies discussed on part 1 and part 2, but I am going to talk about it like in the order in which they talked about it. So with that being said, let's get right into the video. So the podcast starts off discussing how the two ladies met. Shannon was 20, Holly was 19. And it's crazy because how they really bonded was actually due to Holly Mary Combs' first mistake. They joke about it on the podcast. Apparently she had a boyfriend or husband, and that did not end well. And Holly ended up moving in with Shannon for protection, and Shannon even mentions how they had like a German Shepherd, I believe, a dog that was really protecting the two ladies, or at least Holly, whenever she would have her husband or boyfriend issues. They call him the first mistake. And during this time also, Holly does mention that she actually was a godmother of a friend, a mutual friend, and then I guess got fired from being a godmother due to her first mistake. And then as a result of that, Shannon then became the godmother of that child. So yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, you could tell those two ladies have a lot of stories that can last for days. And then Shannon starts diving into how the two ladies became to be part of like one of the most famous shows of all time, Charmed. And it all started like this. So Shannon had recently gotten fired from 90210. Throughout this podcast, they do mention that she showed up to work late, and as a result, she got fired. So one day, I guess Shannon was picking up Holly somewhere. Holly notices a script on the back of Shannon's car and asks Shannon about it. And Shannon's like, it has Aaron Spelling's name on there, so I'm not going to read it. And Aaron Spelling was the man who fired her from 90210 for being late, or at least that was one of the reasons. And she's like, I don't want to read this. And Holly's like, well, they wouldn't give you the script if they didn't think you had the potential. So the two ladies, they go over the script, they love it. And then there becomes the meeting with Aaron Spelling. Mind you, this is the guy who fired Shannon. And Shannon goes on to share with us that he really didn't want to talk about the firing. He kind of was just like, hey, kiddo, I think this would be a really great opportunity for you. And he was in his we're moving on era. What's so funny about this was that Holly actually described the meeting as a coming to Jesus moment. But at the end of the day, it sounded like Shannon had a fresh start. At least that's what she thought. Aaron Spelling actually wanted Shannon for Piper, and what we learned in this podcast, part 1, is that Holly Mary Combs actually auditioned for Phoebe, but didn't really feel like Phoebe suited her, and she was right for obvious reasons. She felt like Phoebe had like a young vibe energy, and even though Holly Mary Combs was young at the time, she still felt like the character wasn't right for her. So one interesting part of this story is that now that you already have Shannon who's cast, Shannon wanted Holly to be on the show too. And so when Holly did her reading, a lot of the casting directors felt like Holly didn't have that it factor. So after the auditions, Shannon actually talked to Aaron Spelling, pulled him aside. They were having a discussion in a parking lot, and some words were said, something along the lines of, coming from Shannon, I'm not going to do this show without Holly. Holly's great for the part. And Aaron Spelling backed her, and that's how Holly Mary Combs got the role of Piper, which they did not regret. She did an amazing job with that role. Now, at the time, Alyssa Milano didn't come into the picture yet. You had an actress named Dana who tried out for the part, but they felt like Dana didn't have star quality. And then you had another person that tried out for the part and got the part of Phoebe, but then quit when it was time for them to do a photo shoot for the TV guide. And the reason why this actor quit is because of religious reasons. Her church didn't like the fact that she was on a show with witches. And ultimately, that's when Alyssa Milano came into the picture. Shannon goes on to share with us that season 1, everyone got along. It was the best season to shoot. And by season 3, Shannon felt like everyone settled into their roles perfectly. There was a lot of growth with the acting, writing, directing. Holly does share with us that they did not have a lot of freedom in the beginning. I mean, well, pretty much the whole show, but they didn't have a lot of freedom with putting their hair up or their clothes. For the first 6 episodes, they do share with us that Aaron Spelling, he was huge on not changing your hair because he felt like the audience, they identified with that character through their physical features. And the 2 ladies, they do admit that that is part of the formula when it comes to an audience really attaching themselves to a show or to the character, but they still go on to say that they didn't like it because they felt like they did not have any freedom. So after they're done talking about their similarities and differences, Shannon does discuss how anytime that she would give a constructive criticism, because these were the same producers from 90210, the show that she got fired from, anytime she would, make any constructive criticism, they'd be like, sure. They would smile, walk away. And then that day she would receive a call from her management team saying, hey, the set is saying you need to stop micromanaging, stop giving your opinions, your ideas, they're not welcomed. Holly and Shannon, they do go on to say that there was only one female writer on set, and her name was Connie. And what was interesting about this female writer was that the show was based off of her sisters. So the 3 witches, Prue, Phoebe, and Piper, were based off of Connie's sisters. And it is sad to hear that the men pushed Connie out. The 2 ladies also share with us that it was purposely designed for the writing room to be far away from the set as possible. So even if you did have female writers, there was only one female writer that was on set, and then she ended up being canned by men anyways. Listening to this podcast, it was very clear that, they really didn't have what they have today. Like, you have Jenna Ortega, who made a comment about the writing on Wednesday, and now she's a producer. And back then, they just were not there yet. And speaking of writing, Holly Mary Combs goes on to say that they had this guy named Brad Kern polish all the scripts when they were done. So even if you did have a female write, I don't know, a dialogue with Piper or Phoebe or whatever, it didn't matter because you had this guy, Brad Kern, who would polish up the script anyway. And Holly Mary Combs was basically saying that all the scripts felt the same. She was so tired of saying the same dialogue. Specifically, we're screwed. Shannon does dive into Alyssa Milano's beef with her. Shannon shares with us that she's not going to read Alyssa Milano's book, Sorry Not Sorry, because she's like, obviously by the title, she's not sorry, so why would I read it? Which is a valid point to make. Now, Shannon says once the magazine covers started happening, that's when Alyssa Milano became very jealous. Shannon shares with us that she was never really one to be jealous of things like that. Like, it actually was an inconvenience to work as hard as they did, 16 to 18-hour days, and then on the weekend do a photo shoot. She was like, this was something that she was never envious of. Shannon says that she even had the same exact experience on 90210 when she would show up to these shoots, and yes, she was on the cover, and she's like, people would get mad at her because they wouldn't tell the magazine, hey, why can't you add this person to the shoot, or why can't you add that person? And she was like, it's not a competition. And I also started listening to when Holly spoke and when she didn't. Holly was very neutral. So Shannon shares with us that Alyssa Milano was trying to take Holly from her. And a prime example of this is when Holly got sick and she was in the hospital. A little bit about Holly's backbringing. Long story short, she was raised by basically 2 teenagers. And so she really didn't have that foundation, that family. Holly shares with us that Alyssa Milano and Alyssa's mother pretty much adopted her, treated her like family. So when she was sick at the time, when Shannon tried to see Holly, the 2 wouldn't let her see Holly. And Holly didn't know anything about it because you had Holly sitting in the hospital messaging Shannon like, hey, are you ever going to see me? And this whole entire time, Holly had no idea that Alyssa Milano and her mother kept separated Shannon from her. The ladies both agree that family caused such a huge divide, and by season 2, Shannon says that she was crying every single night. Now, before we get into part 2, where it gets really juicy, I just wanted to state that Holly Mary Combs, for the most part, she does say that back then they all could have, including her, they could have behaved a little bit better. Now we're in part 2, and Shannon does make a disclaimer that, this podcast is called Let's Be Clear. And so she's so tired of the narratives, the false narratives, and now she's here to set the record straight. With that being said, this isn't to deter people from watching Charmed. This isn't to start up old drama. This is kind of just setting the record straight. So she doesn't want anyone to take any negative hatred they have for the people that they talked about in this podcast and then to carry on with it. That's not what it's about. It's just about setting the record straight. Now, Shannon goes on to share with us that the narrative that was assigned to her, when she said that, I was like, well, isn't that a choice of words? Anyways, she goes, the narrative that was assigned to her is that she quit the show, but that's not what really happened. So what ended up happening was Alyssa Milano, she was going to like a corporate mediator. That's what Holly and Shannon called this person, a corporate mediator. So anytime that she felt uncomfortable on set, she would document it and she would go to this corporate mediator. Now, they do admit that they did not go to a corporate mediator. They actually refused when the mediator wanted to talk to the two. So one day, this was when Holly Mary Combs, she was starting to recover from her surgery. She had a meeting, and this was to discuss how Shannon will no longer be on the show and that they were firing Shannon. Holly was told because Alyssa Milano went through the proper steps, talked to the corporate mediator, and documented all the chain of events that occurred. Because she did that, if they didn't fire Shannon, Alyssa threatened to sue the network for a hostile work environment. Shannon does share with us that one of the hiccups Alyssa did have with her was that she was getting paid the highest. And Shannon's like, well, Aaron Spelling and I went to the network. We got Holly. They signed me on because I was from 90210. So I was a big name at the time. The reason why they picked up the show to begin with, it was because of me. So yeah, she would get paid more. It was really sad to hear also about Shannon's father because he was sick at the time. And she's like, why would I quit? I was using my money to provide for my family and their health. So why would I quit? But that was a narrative that she had to use because her managers were like, your career is going to be over if you don't make this statement. Now, here was the part with me listening as a viewer. It struck me odd when the two ladies could not give an example of any of the things Alyssa complained about. I mean, they pretty much were like, we didn't do anything. Shannon never did anything. I mean, the only incident that Shannon could bring up where Alyssa felt that she was working in a hostile work environment would have to be when Alyssa Milano and her mother created websites for Holly and Shannon, and when Alyssa's mother talked to Shannon about it, Shannon was like, no, I want my dad to work on that project because he's feeling sick right now and this will give him something to do, so please take the site down. And because Shannon did direct some episodes, she does mention a time where she was a director of the show and they asked her if she could work with Alyssa on this and yada yada yada, but there wasn't anything specific. And I kind of want to call BS on that. I feel like they're still holding out. I feel like they probably signed something where they can't talk specifically about things because I want to know, what did Alyssa complain about in those documents? What was she documenting? That's what I want to know. I mean, Holly shares with us that there were some backhand deals where Alyssa Milano ended up, she didn't say it, but she said it. She ended up getting paid anyways the same amount as Shannon because she complained so much. And Holly goes on to share that she never once asked for a raise, but that was because she cared about the show. She cared about the budget of the show. She didn't want to take money from the budget. She didn't want to take money from guest stars. She shares with us that Brian Cruz, who played her husband on the show, Leo, had to be cut from some episodes because of the budget. And she shares Nick Lachey also had to be cut for some episodes. She didn't want to do that to the show. If I was Holly Mary Combs, I'd have just got my coin because Holly shares with us that she did not want to be on this show. So let's get back to the blackmail, okay? There was blackmail. So when Holly is learning that the network is firing Shannon, right? Because Alyssa threatened to sue the network for a hostile work environment, Holly goes, well, I don't want to do the show because if it wasn't for Shannon, she went to bat for me to get me on the show. And I'm not going to work without her on the show. I'm not going to do that to her. And that's when she was told by the network that if she did not do the show, they would deduct her wages. And they would come up with a number that would be their loss for not having her on the show. And then Holly goes, well, what if I decide to bag groceries in Arizona? And they were like, we will still deduct the pay from your paycheck from that. They also said that if she works on any other show, they would make sure that her pay would also be reduced. So she felt like she was being blackmailed, which that's what it pretty much was. Damn, I really don't know what I would do in that situation if I was Holly Mary Combs. But she was basically blackmailed to stay on Charm. And what's crazy is that to have that feeling of anger for being blackmailed, but also, even Shannon states this, that she had to carry the show. You know what I mean? And she did, because when I watched the show, my sister and I, and we were like, okay, well, I guess we're going to be hanging on to Piper. And then the two ladies, they both agree that when Rose McGowan, she came into the picture after they killed off Prue, she was a tough one, because she had to deal with the backlash, the aftermath. She had to deal with the audience from losing a sister. Then she had to deal with behind the scenes. So she was really tough. And Holly Mary Combs, she goes on to state that she never once blamed Rose for anything. Shannon even shares that in 2020, even the media tried to pin the two against each other, which never happened because, why would she dislike Rose? Rose had nothing to do with her getting fired from the show. Now, here was another thing that I found extremely juicy to me. Now, I had no idea, because I was a child at the time watching this, but I had no idea that Brian Cruz, I believe that's his last name. I apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but I had no idea that Leo and Phoebe, they were together. They were an item in real life. I had no idea, right? So imagine when Alyssa, she's dating Brian, and Brian plays Piper's husband or Holly's husband on the show. So imagine, as this is all going down, with Shannon getting fired, Rose coming in, Brian's dating Alyssa behind the scenes, while Piper still has to kiss him on screen, or Holly still has to kiss Brian on screen. Like, can you imagine how that must feel? And then she goes on to share with us, Holly does, that almost a year ago in France, Brian apologized. He never really took into consideration what Holly was going through, how she felt about the situation. So I thought that was very interesting. It took him like 20 years plus, something like that, to apologize for that. Now, one could easily argue, like, that's not Brian's responsibility. He's not in the mix. What does he have to do with it? I just think the fact that there was no acknowledgement, no, are you okay? Like, I'm sorry you must be going through this. Holly made it sound like he said nothing. Like, zip, so I don't know, maybe some people will feel like he didn't need to say anything, but I do feel, because obviously he's not with Alyssa Milano now, it's probably more convenient, since him and Holly go on so many panels together, that it's definitely convenient for him now to make an apology. But I guess all that really matters is that Holly felt like his apology was sincere. Now, revisiting that meeting that Holly had with the network, learning that Shannon got fired, Holly shares with us that she felt like she didn't have a voice. She never felt like she did. And Shannon's like, no, like, you do have a voice. And the reason why they use blackmail is because you did have a voice. And they tried to take that away from you. It was a legal issue. Don't blame yourself over it. It's okay. And you can tell that because Holly does get very emotional. She gets super emotional talking about it because that's her friend. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, don't cry. I was like, oh, because it was really sad. I'm like, you could really tell the two have just a really great, amazing friendship. And to hear Shannon tell Holly that, it's okay. Like, don't worry about it. Forgive yourself for that. It's fine. You did the best that you could. You stuck up for me, and it's okay. It was a legal matter. So Shannon ends the topic of the beef, the juicy stuff, or the tea, with there's no hate left, and they wish everyone peace, love, and healing. And the podcast is called Let's Be Clear, so she's definitely going to be speaking the truth. Now, they do discuss, to close up the podcast, they do discuss, Piper's character, how many kids does she have? Will they do a reboot? Holly's like, I don't really like the R word, the reboot word, because that kind of... it makes it sound like a reboot, meaning that the show could have been improved. Here's what they could do better. So Shannon's like, well, would you do a continuation? And she's like, yeah, of course. So, that's up in the air. They do state that they don't obviously own the show. So that's really up to the network whether they want to do a reboot, like another one, because they already did a reboot that was horrible. But anyways, the two ladies, they end the conversation talking about a fundraiser. They share with us that a lot of fishermen, they're getting a lot of money, getting paid to capture dolphins. They discuss SeaWorld and how, animals are being starved for tricks. It's not normal. It's not okay. There's obviously better ways to see an animal without having them being locked in a cage or being starved, being treated unwell, separating them from their babies. So the two ladies, they end the podcast talking about a good cause, and then they go on to say, or Shannon does to Holly, I'll see you in 2 hours. And I just think that's so cute. I love the fact that they are friends till this day. They've been friends for years, since, Holly was 19, Shannon was 20. So I love the fact that till this day, they are like this. But yeah, that was the podcast. That was, went to Dramaversity for that. But my thoughts on this is I still need some clarification on what specifically did Alyssa document. That's what I want to know. What was it specifically? Because they say it was nothing. Holly says that, what Alyssa was complaining about, you couldn't fire someone for that today. There's so many horrific people out there in this industry that deserve what Shannon got, but Shannon never deserved what she got. And so I just want to know, what exactly was that? And it sounds like it wasn't nothing, but who really knows? A lot of people don't like Shannen Doherty because of 90210. They heard that she got fired from there. But keep in mind, 90210 and Charmed were ran by the same producers. So it already wasn't a fair game to begin with, because Shannon was once again walking back into an environment where she'd just gotten fired from. It's like getting your old job back and people now judging you more than they did prior. So yeah, that was my thoughts about this. I just want to know, what exactly did Alyssa Milano document? So maybe we'll never know. I don't know. But anyways, leave a comment below. Let me know what you guys think. I really enjoyed this podcast. And notice how. Okay. And one more thing. Notice how, because I'm so annoyed with this, Shannen Doherty had so many ads in her part 1 and part 2, like a million ads, right? And you don't really hear that being like the prime complaint, because notice how when other people have podcasts, they complain, oh, there's too many ads. And I get, like, Shannon is an A-lister, so I guess maybe that has something to do with it. But they're both podcasts, So I was all for Shannon having the ads. I'm like, girl, get your money, get your coin. I'm okay with that. And I feel like it just needs to be normalized that a podcast is a business. And so people are allowed to have ads. I just wanted to notate that, because I noticed how here no one was saying nothing, even though she had a lot of ads. Whereas I felt like maybe you had like a few comments maybe, but it wasn't a huge spectacle, like, or a lot of podcast listeners like to complain about in other podcasts. But anyways, the opinions no one asked for. But let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you soon on the next video. Bye, guys.